What's up, guys? I'm Alex.
I'm Jason. We're the Table Monkeys, and today we are going to continue talking about the Kings move.
Yes, as you just seen, Jason, pretty good Kings mover.
Yeah.
That was pretty expert level maneuvering in a match before you finally transition to the perfect time for a press.
And just more or less understanding of the move, how to get into it, how to utilize it. And Logan, who I beat, that's definitely my best win to date, I think, on my right arm so far in my career. And Logan was definitely one of the favorites coming in from the East Coast. I know Uncle John can attest to how strong he is. He slammed Brian DeSormo a little earlier in the tournament. Hopefully we were able to throw a clip up just now of that. So he's a beast. He was strong, but he definitely didn't play into the Kings move very well, as we talked about earlier. But at the same time, I think it's definitely my best Kings move performance to date, right?
Yeah, and we've had some comments in the previous videos talking about we want more Kings move videos. And we've seen other people in the community Kings moving lately. Ryan Bowen, for example.
Definitely talking to Ryan. Yeah. He's definitely, and he's even said that he's actively trying to learn it.
Yeah.
So originally we thought, hey, let's make a video like for Ryan more or less, because he's not doing it very well. And then as well, like Alex said, other people were commenting, asking for it. So you guys want it? We're here. It's a rainy day in Toronto. We got a ghetto fucking little tripod setup with an umbrella, but we're making it happen so everybody can become a better Kings mover.
Yeah.
So
let's get in the strap and start this video.
So just before we put on the strap, I will say that once you learn the Kings move, for me, slipping, I basically would do a Kings move without the strap, and it's a pretty good way to slip. And if somebody does try to hang on to you, you can easily bring them to the pad. So once we show you how to do it in the strap, in order to get to the strap, just try to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. All right, guys, so the strap is on, and as you've heard many times before, especially hopefully from us, is the Kings move is basically revolves around rise and pronation, especially pronation, right? And you've heard Michael Todd recently talk about not being able to access his rise and pronation and how it basically leaves his Kings move completely fucked. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to start from the beginning, how I learned to do it, and what I learned about it on the way, and how I got it to be where it is. Try to do it a little bit more concisely than a 2-year story, and give you guys the keys to it. So the first thing was, I remember Devin saying that you want to get your thumb as deep as possible, and you want to drag hard. Just thumb deep, drag hard. Thumb deep, drag hard. There's some old videos of him in Florida talking about this and stuff, and I just remember trying that in practice, and as soon as somebody would pull me to the side, I would try to push my thumb through and drag really hard, and I found this lock, and I found a lot of people losing their wrists right here. So kept working on that. So that's really that's the first and foremost thing that you have to understand. Drag and drive your thumb as deep as you can.
Yeah, because the Kings move is a top roll, which is a pulling back movement. So in a top roll, you're either using your brachialis to post, or you're using your lat to drag. And especially since we're in the strap now, dragging becomes so much more effective.
Yeah, and that's a big reason why this is such a strap-based move.
Yeah.
But that brings me to the next point, which was something I learned from Tyler Hamilton, who's a really good Kings mover as well here in Ontario, and he has been pulling with Crazy George for a number of years. So he learned how to Kings move from Crazy George, who I met later, and I'll talk about what I learned from Crazy George a little bit later. But what I learned from Tyler was that this part of the strap, where the strap is on the back of your wrist here, that's where you want to pronate. Like once you've got your thumb set, where the way that I can really affect my opponent's wrist is that when he hits to the side, is I actively turn into that part of the strap. And just in doing that, it helps me force my thumb deep as well. And again, as long as I do that and drag at the same time, it just creates a ton of pressure in your wrist, right?
Because we're connected strap to strap, this part of the strap is connected to my wrist. So when he pronates through this part of the strap, it automatically bends my wrist back. And the more I hit to the side, and the more he pronates, the more my wrist flexion gets turned backwards.
And that's really what, like, for that match we showed in the beginning with Logan, that's really where he got hung up, was he spent too many hits trying to get to the pin pad and just burying himself deeper and deeper into that pronation, which takes us to the next point of the Kings move, is where do you fight back? So yes, I've created a lock and I've got this drag and I've got this spot here that feels solid, but once I want to attack back, or they leave a gap and I need to fill that gap, what's the right direction to go, right? instinctively, a lot of people think it's this way, back across the table. Especially if you watch Michael Todd with the way he pulls, he does do that a lot, which is for a different reason that we'll explain later. The first thing you need to do once you've made that stop is you need to now start to eat up their hand and get up their thumb and deeper into their fingers. And that's what you do on the correction. So if Alex is hitting, and now the next one he's gonna like kind of hit and stop, because usually people will hit, they'll push through, they'll be like, fuck, I can't get there, and then they'll think, what do they have to do? As soon as they come up, what I'm doing is kicking back and rising as much as I can. There's as much kickback and rise as possible. And at that point, I can really climb up his hand, and I've also eaten up a lot more of his cup.
Yeah, and now at neutral position, my wrist is already in a bent back position.
Yeah.
So I'm starting from a worse spot than I was prior.
And that kickback is really important, and I think that's a big part of the King's move that gets missed. And you do it even earlier than that. I didn't actively say like doing it in the beginning when I'm driving my thumb and pronating into here. But one of the main parts of the King's move from the very beginning is that I'm not actively fighting for flexion. I'm fighting the opposite way. My rise it's not just rise and pronate like this, it's rise, pronate, and kick back. I don't care that my wrist is bent back. I actively want to attack with my knuckle into his fingers this way, into the strap, which allows me to add more pressure on the back here with the pronation.
And more rise makes it harder for me to get any wrist flexion.
Yeah. And out of the strap, that's the main way that you end up creating a slip. If you set up out of the strap and they go to the side and you just kick back and rise and pronate hard, the way it attacks their fingers, it's just extremely hard to hang on to.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's probably the biggest thing I think people miss is the kickback, right?
The kickback. So yeah, so in conclusion, there's the thumb forward, there's the dragging, there's the pronating through this part of the strap, and then there's the rising and the kickback.
Yeah. And the rising and the kickback they're like they happen together. They're equally important, and even when I train them, I try to train them together as much as possible. So again, once we get out here and we've got that lock, he's hit a few times, and now he comes back, I get more on his hand and let him hit again. And what you want is you want to create like a dead space here. You want him to feel no threat in the middle except for this outward pressure, because as you're coming out of his hand, it usually intimidates people who want to hold you in and forces them to keep trying to hit because they feel you're getting away from them. So I'm always fighting out, and then as soon as he hits, I'm just pronating and creating some up pressure like with my brachialis. And that brings us to our next point, which is how to do a King's move legally. So what you see a lot of people doing nowadays is they get out in this position here, they get below the table, and their arm is just completely extended and straight, right?
So not only is this dangerous, but this is also a foul in many federations because your shoulder is below the table in that neutral to losing position. So obviously don't practice that King's move. That's not the King's move we're trying to teach. And then this is not a King's move. A King's move isn't a foul. There are ways to King's move while keeping it legal.
Teach me about how to do desperation move.
Exactly. And so, like I said earlier about the pronating and the kickback and the rising and creating that lock there, the way to do it legally is that I do need to use some arm strength and some brachialis, but I'm also on the side of my elbow, so there is a bit of joint lock, like depending on which direction they're trying to pull me down, right? But what I do when, like, as soon as you can see in the video, as soon as Logan hits, I lift my shoulder to create more rotation and to create more up pressure into my hand.
Immediately I feel that targeting my wrist flexion even more as I continue driving.
Yeah.
So after you've got the stop a bunch of times, you've been re-gripping, gaining more and more height, and my attacks to the side are getting less and less vicious or effective, threatening. How do you then transition to get to the pin, or how do you just get the pin in general?
Yeah, so there's usually two ways basically that a King's move finishes, right? You either see somebody fatigue so much that, and because I haven't been fighting for flexion, right? That's another reason why you don't want to fight for it, is so you're saving it for later. But they've been trying to roll me out and fight, and their pronation is starting to die. So if I burn them out enough and I get them at the top of the table here where I can feel them weakening up, I can just cup them in. And once they're here, it's like an easy finish. They're so weak at that point because they're so fatigued. So that's the best way to finish. If you've burnt them out, the easiest way, no transition needed, you just add your flexion. That's it.
Yeah.
If that doesn't work, or if they're too vicious of an opponent, it's too fierce of a battle, like my battle with Logan there, you're most likely going to need to transition to a press, which a lot of Kings movers do, and it's a very effective way to finish your opponent because their arm has been opened up, they've been fatigued going to the side, and it's all the opposite strengths once you get to it that you've been using to hold your Kings move. So if they do have some lock left, you've got a lot of pressure left to give.
You're
usually.
fresh and I'm burnt out in that spot.
Yeah, exactly, right? So we talked about transitions in our last video, and it's basically the same idea. So all I did to Logan was, again, I let him hit, I got up into his hand, hit again. Eventually you see me kind of position myself up like this, so now I'm really comfortable. I've got my elbow to the back and to my side of the pad, so I'm as far away from my pin pad as possible. And actually at that point, my thumb was buried in his hand, but I was up his hand like that. But he had tried to be climbing my thumb, but I kept pronating, so my pronation was locked, and I had the riser game beat. And I could tell, like, his arm was still strong enough, I wasn't going to be able to just cup him in and bring him down to the pad, and I also really wanted the transition because I could feel that it was there for whatever reason. So I just waited, I tried to give him a bit of a gap, let him hit into it one more time, stopped it as high as I could, and from the stop, I pulled back on it. So now as soon as I pull back, he's like fighting and doesn't want me to pull him back. So there's resistance for me to pull myself up, which is what we said in the last video, is basically you pull yourself up to your hand. And once I got up to my hand, it was, it was a cakewalk from there. So
that's how you expertly Kings move in all areas of the table and then transition to a press.
And do it legally. Yeah. And again, I think the biggest takeaway for everybody who's trying it right now, who has been doing it, is kick back and rise. Those are essential to creating this pressure. Obviously everybody knows about the pronation, so you'll learn that, or the added thing there is the wrist, but kick back and rise, that's what we see people doing wrong so much, as we see this King's hook move and people actively fighting for flexion, and it's so impossible from that position to control the riser game. Even though you've got your pronation engaged, and some people do feel strong there, it's not a proper King's move, and it's not affecting your opponent's hand at all the same way. So kick back and rise, get up into the hand, don't worry about your flexion, save it for the end of the match. And yeah, that's King's moving 1000.
Yeah. And if you like this video, please leave us a like, drop a comment, share, subscribe.
Make sure Ryan sees this motherfucker.
Yeah, tag him in the comments.
Yeah, he could be a very good Kings mover. He's definitely got the strengths for it.
Oh, yeah.
So fucking everybody can be if you learn how to do it properly. So watch this video again. All those things Alex said, and monkeys out. Peace.